Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the next session, which is about ethnic identities in the midst of conflict. We have, again, a very eminent panel base here, and it's my pleasure to first invite the person who's going to be moderating the session. I have great pleasure in inviting someone who, in fact, was a former colleague of mine at NDTV. She is a senior editor, foreign affairs editor, and a senior anchor at NDTV, and in a career spanning 2 decades, she has reported on a range of issues. This could be from environment to crime, from politics to human rights, conflict to her real forte, which was the world affairs. She has been the USA correspondent of NDTV as well, bagged many awards, including most recently the Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism. Let's hear it for Maya Mirchandani. Maya. That's a nice, rare chance to welcome a former colleague onto the stage. Yes, and welcome to Bangalore. I would also like to invite Padma Rao Sundarji, veteran foreign correspondent based in New Delhi, long-standing South Asia Bureau Chief of German News Magazine, during which Sri Lanka was an intensive part of her beat. She has also worked for ARD German Television, ZDF, Geo and Outlook in New York, and her work has appeared in Syndicate in New York Times, the Herald Tribune, and in the anthologies of writing by foreign correspondents in Germany and India. Padma currently freelances for various international and Indian publications, and you might have seen her so many times on so many programs and television channels. Ladies and gentlemen, Padma Rao Sundarji. One gentleman who actually gave a beautiful start to this whole Sahitya Utsava, the 4th edition of the Bangalore Literature Festival. He comes from Kashmir and has such a connection with Karnataka, including with personalities like Sri V.K. Gokak and Anantamurthy. He is an award-winning Kashmiri writer, but then he is just so much more than that. Screenplay writer, has written so many serials, has climbed mountains, and has told us about it in the morning address. Let's waste no more time in welcoming Sahitya Academy Award winner Mohammad Zaman Azurdah Sahab. His essay collection, called The Essay, was the one which won the Academy Award and has subsequently gone on to write at least 50 more books. That is Azurdah Sahab. I also have great pleasure in inviting someone who has come from across the border. He has an academic background in anthropology and has been a travel writer, freelance journalist since 2008, traveling extensively around Pakistan, documenting historical and cultural heritage. He has written for so many newspapers and magazines, including The News, Express, Tribune, The Dawn, Friday Times, Scroll and Himal. His first book, A White Trail, A Journey into the Heart of Pakistan's Religious Minorities, was published in 2013. His second book, In Search of Shiva, which is a study of folk religious practices in Pakistan, will be released in December. And his third book, Walking with Nanak, is scheduled to be released in April next year. He's an educator. Over to you, Maya.
It is really a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Actually, I have been told that you should justify your travel from Kashmir to this place rather than other things. And in the morning I told you, मेरा कर्नाटका से relation बहुत पुराना है. जब मैं पहली बार यहाँ आया था बंगलोर, it was 74. 74, most of you were not born, even their parents were not married then, or seen each other. It was really a city of gardens. Then, after a pretty long time, I had to come again, stay at Mysore. But what would I do with this city of gardens? That I would land not before 11 o'clock at night in Bangalore, take a cab, go straight away to Mysore. I was that much scared of Bangalore traffic. But some people who are there in my memory, in my eyes, in my heart and mind, I owe them a lot. When I was awarded by the Sahitya Academy, V.K. Gokak was the president. Then later on, I developed relation with Anantamurthy. He was chairman NBT. Later on, he became the President Sahitya Academy. We shared many things. We shared dice and these notes. And then later on, I met Kambarji. He was just now here. Then Narihali and one Mr. Kikeri Narayan. He comes from Madkeri. Then during my stay here, I had to learn a little Kannada. I'll give you my experience first. It was my first morning in Mysore. I had to have tea. I saw a cup was that much, and all around me were speaking Kannada. Then I saw a girl, Sushila. She was from Tamil. I heard her speaking Tamil. I called her. I said, "Do you know Kannada?" She said, "Yes." I said, "What do they call for one?" She said, "Undo." "What for two?" She said, "Yaradu." "What for three?" She said, "Moro." "What for four?" She said, "Nalaku." Then I said, "What for tea?" She said, "Tea." I said, "If I have to ask somebody to bring it." She said, "Tagobani." Then I called the security guard, gave him a 20 rupees note, a 10 rupees note, and told him, "Nalako tea Tagobani." He went and got 4 cups of tea that made my 1 cup. So anyway, that was my first experience. Then I learned many things, Chanagide and other things. There was one Steno Hima. She just drafted something in the functional vocabulary. But today, I fell flat when I could not understand my friend Narihali, Kambar, Professor Hampa, and the respected lady who was here. But I could get it from them that we can talk of Kashmiri, we can talk of Urdu, we can talk of Marathi, we can talk of any other language that's there in our country. Actually, this ethnic business, I don't know, because we were born human beings, born in some homes, born in some families, born in some dynasties, and started acting like that. It is only when you come nearer to the end, then only you come to know that you had some identity, you had ethnic. It is more political than literary, more expressional than the language itself, than language itself. लेकिन एक बात है कि आदमी जब पैदा होता है कुछ दिनों के बाद बच्चा ही अटेंशन डाइवर्ट करने के लिए, अटेंशन अट्रैक्ट करने के लिए वो कहता है कि मैं हूँ और उसके लिए वो क्या कुछ नहीं करता. आपको ताज्जुब होगा, कुछ लोग गुंडे सिर्फ इसलिए बनते हैं कि वो अपनी पहचान बनाएं और कुछ लोग शरीफ भी इसीलिए बनते हैं कि वो अपनी पहचान बनाएं. बहरहाल अब कैसे एडजस्टमेंट हो क्या हो. I would give an example in the beginning. We were making a film on Brokpas. Brokpas are there in Kargil, Dah and Hanu. And some people researched for us for that film. They are very simple people. Came as a tribe with Alexander the Great. They are there. They have their own rights, they have their own customs, and they have that polyandry too, that polygamy. But they have certain reasons for that. Not that what my young friend was saying, not those, there are other reasons for that. Maybe we discuss that also. But you will be surprised to know, when Indian army comes to them, tell them, you are Hindus. You should worship like this and you should. Then missionaries go to them. Hey, you are God's creation. God is Jesus. And you are Christians. And then Muslims go and then whisper azan in their ears. And then some secularists and some others, progressive, they go and they tell them something else. But do you know how we titled that film? The Question of Tomorrow. Today they are Brokpas. They live in the Hanu. They have their customs. They have their ways of living. They have their ways of worshipping. They worship in kitchen. Their God is in kitchen. What about tomorrow? Because people are coming and telling them, preaching them, and what will they be tomorrow? We fail to understand. Anyway, this was just to tell you that I am here. Now it is their work, our work, to make them speak so that I also could learn something. Please carry on.
Thank you, Azurdah. That was a lovely way of talking to us about how, the divisions are sort of imposed upon us from the outside, or we're taught a condition to think in a particular kind of way. And very interesting that you talk about, the question of tomorrow, really what is it going to be for all of us? What legacy do we leave behind? But that is, I mean, at the risk of sounding a little bit too much of a pragmatist right now, that sounds like a very ideal utopian argument that you are making, because at the end of the day, when we look around just within our own region, we don't have to look beyond the South Asian region, whether it's Kashmir that you talk about. I mean, books have been written on Hindu rulers and Muslim subjects, and we see what's happening decades later. Padma, in Sri Lanka, the conflict, brutal civil war that we saw was centered around identity politics and how a particular community in Sri Lanka did not feel they had enough representation. As a reporter on the ground, your book has come out earlier this year as well. Tell us how much of a role ethnicity and religion played in that conflict, how much of it was politicized, much more than necessary.
Thank you, Maya. I don't know if this is on. No. The light is on.
Here, use mine. Why don't you just use mine? Thanks.
Thanks, Maya.
Set it right.
Talking about ethnic identities in the context of Sri Lanka, I mean, this is the key subject, so I had to do some thinking this morning. I'd just like to, outline a few things very briefly. The so-called ethnic identities are blurred in Sri Lanka because, like in India, the very definition implies various identities, various differences. I'll give you an example. First of all, there are religious identities. There are Buddhist Sri Lankans, there are Hindus, there are Christians, there are Muslims. There is even one Parsi lady, one Jewish lady who married Sri Lankan. And there may be a few Parsis also in Sri Lanka. But basically these are the religious identities. Then you have racial identities. You have, you have the Sinhalese, then you have the Tamils, and among the Tamils again you have the native Tamils, the ones who live in the north and east of Sri Lanka, who are essentially Tamils who came with the kingdoms that migrated to, or actually that conquered Sri Lanka, the South Indian kingdoms. And then you have the Tamils known as the Indian origin Tamils, the IOTs, who are Tamils who were taken by the British as labor to work on the tea plantations, and they went to Sri Lanka much later, in the late 1800s. And it is important to add that that section of Tamils were not part of the so-called, what people think is an ethnic conflict, that was the Civil War. The third thing that you have are racial identities. You have the Sinhalese, you have the Tamils, again the Indian Tamils and the native Tamils. Then you have the Muslims, many of them are of Arabic trader descent, many of them converted centuries later in Sri Lanka. And then you have the Naga and the Yakka. These are the original tribal communities of the island of Sri Lanka. And then you have the Burghers, who are like our Anglo-Indians. They are people of English, Portuguese, Dutch descent and origin. So you have all these, and then of course you have the linguistic identities, which is the fourth category of ethnic identity. You have the Sinhalese speakers and you have the Tamil speakers. So, and you do have a lot of Dutch speakers, but that's a dwindling number. So, unlike in the West, and primarily our impression of Sri Lanka or our knowledge of the Sri Lankan Civil War, for people who have not covered the war as I have or as Maya has, as correspondents, naturally your primary source of information is the media, is us. I mean, people like us or, newspapers. And, but unlike in the West, say like in countries like in South Africa or other African countries, where the racial differences between the native, the racial differences are far fewer there than they are in countries like India and in Sri Lanka. So, or rather the other way around, what I meant is that in Africa or in colonized Africa, you have, the Caucasian Africans of Caucasian origin, and you have Africans of African origin. So it's a very clear distinction. It's a visible distinction. Even that distinction blurs in Sri Lanka. So now the thing is that there is another point I wanted to make. One could say that the pan-national identity and the subcontinental identity has always been the dominant identity in our countries in South Asia. At one level, we are all the same. We all have the same origins. At other levels, as I have demonstrated, we come from different places. Now, that was the case till a certain point when colonial powers came in. And that is the pan-unity, that is the pan-identity that colonial powers began to chip away at and fracture. And how did they do that? They did that by going back to these old divides, old conflicts, Tamil versus Sinhalese in this case, and by resorting to those old what was actually competition and what was conflict at a very, very, thousands or hundreds of years ago. They resorted to those and rejuvenated them and brought them back to life all over again through a series of moves which most of you know as divide and rule. This divide and rule policy was a peculiarity of especially the departing British colonial power. And this was a move designed to fracture and any semblance of existing unity that there may have been among the peoples of the countries they were leaving. So in Sri Lanka's case, that was the root cause of the conflict. It was not about Tamil versus Sinhalese, Christian versus Muslim. It was essentially about the fact that the British had intentionally begun to set up the better educational institutions in the north of the country, which was Jaffna. Jaffna soon emerged as a seat of high learning and education and everything that was superior. And they also made sure that the civil service, which was a very coveted position in Sri Lanka, Ceylon civil service like here, was manned by graduates of those universities, so primarily Tamils. This is the root of the so-called ethnic conflict, and the point I was trying to make is that you will see that ethnicity was not at the root of that conflict as much as outside determination was to fracture that unity. Now, but what did the conflict seem like to all of you? Eventually we'll get to that. To those reading about it, to those observing it from the outside, many people thought this is a conflict between militant Buddhists and minority Hindus, or it's a conflict between the Sinhalese majority and the Tamil minority. In actual fact, I mean, you'll be quite surprised to hear this, the leadership of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam was not Hindu, it was Christian. All the top cadres of the LTTE were Christian, they were not Hindu. There were also many Muslims among the Sinhalese, and there are many Muslims who are Tamil speaking Muslims. Then you have, so if the root cause was Sinhalese majority discrimination against Tamil minority, then it must be said that throughout the war, the minority, in this case the Tamil minority, continued to have and hold the support of all Western nations, whose constitutions are basically so embedded in the human rights philosophy that they, and also because of the 950,000 Tamil diaspora who settled abroad, sections of which, not all, sections of which supported separatism in Sri Lanka. So because of all these issues, these were the same countries who had caused the fracture and retreated, who were now allowing weapons transfers and sales back to what they thought was the freedom fighting group, all in the name of human rights. And reporters around the world, finally we are at fault ourselves. We prefer to just toe that line. I realize it's very difficult for a reporter who sits in London or sits in Frankfurt to actually imagine what's going on the ground. We are more privileged in that sense because we live closer to the scene and were able to witness it. But reporters also, towed a lazy, known line, a very selective, not entirely very well-informed line on Sri Lanka, and ultimately one that has caused and continues to cause a lot of divisiveness in Sri Lanka and among second and third generation Tamils who really have nothing to do with the conflict, but who still believe or are made to believe that there is something there to be kept alive. So the fact is that the LTTE, ladies and gentlemen, was a megalomaniacal, tyrannical terror group. It may have begun as a freedom fighting group, but it escalated or deteriorated into a totally different avatar. And please don't forget, this was the group that it was the author, the inventor of the suicide bomb, the Fidain attack, the author, the inventor of the IED device, and forcibly recruited child soldiers and forcibly used humans as shields in the many, many, many battles that were fought, the so-called Elam Wars. So I would like to have read out 2 paragraphs from my book, but I'll ask you for permission if I'd like to illustrate this point, unless you'd like to go to our next speaker first, and we can come back later.
Back to that. Yeah, okay.
So that's what I have to say.
Yeah, a couple of very interesting points actually, because you talk about divide and rule and how that's the legacy that's fueled this sentiment of separateness, so to speak, that feeds ethnic conflict or feeds conflict. And I'm glad you made that case and the point about the LTTE, because and the tactics. I mean, you and I have also survived LTTE terror tactics in our own reporting days. Now, today when we talk about terror, the sort of the superimposition of Islamic terror and suicide bombing, it's interesting to sort of have people like Padma come in and remind us that this is a pattern that exists in it's not about the religion, it is about a kind of terror. Now, Haroon, you're in Pakistan. One thing, of course, that I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions for you will be about how Pakistan itself deals with its own terror problem. But
and you should just clear it that it's not Islamic terror or Hindu terror. Or
you
just correct it, because they will take it.
Precisely, which is why I said I'm glad Padma made that point about the LTT, because it's not just about one kind of religion. It's about terror as in the name of religion, in the name of identity. But coming back to my point, Haroon, apart from the questions you'll have on Pakistan's war on terror internally, will be, you've written the White Trail is basically also about the minorities within Pakistan who you've talked about, the Ahmadiyas who've been persecuted, the Baha'is, the Parsis, the Hindus, Sikhs, as you have them, and Christians as well. In Pakistan. Tell us a little bit about your research. Okay. I think that will be interesting for our audience right now. And what fault lines specifically you came across as you were talking to people? How comfortable were they to talk about their experiences? Because in my experience as a reporter, when you come across somebody who feels persecuted, whatever minority group they may be part of, their hesitation to speak openly is also something you confront, and it's a huge challenge when you're doing your research. Talk to us about that.
Thank you, Maya, for the question, and I'd like to thank BLF for inviting me. It's wonderful being in Bangalore. Such a different environment from what is Islamabad or Lahore like. Well, coming back to your question, so as far as the fault lines are concerned in Pakistan, I think after partition, the fault lines became very clear. It became religious. So, so if the idea was that being Muslim automatically makes you a Pakistani. So I teach at a school, and a lot of times in conversations that I have with kids, they would refer to Shah Rukh Khan as Pakistani, or they would refer to Amir Khan as Pakistani. So even today, how the Muslims are viewed in India, in Pakistan, that sort of sentiment sort of echoes. I was in Kashmir. I was working there. On what we call the Azad Kashmir, the Pakistani occupied or administered Kashmir. And even there you have those elements where even you have villages across the LOC and they are still referred to as Pakistani villages, or they are our villages. So the fault lines as far as, so that's sort of the premises upon which the Pakistani identity is based. Now having said that, then this also has blowbacks when you talk about Hindus, for example, in Pakistan, and we have, so the largest minority in Pakistan is Hindus. There's I think around 3 million, 4 million Hindus. I'm not sure about the exact figure. So when you define yourself as Pakistani and Muslim and being Muslim and Pakistani sort of becomes synonymous, then what do you do with all those Hindus? And of course, at a school level, when I'm having these conversations with my even teacher colleagues, for them, Hindus in Pakistan are essentially Indians. So I remember when the World Cup was happening, this is the 2011 World Cup, and when India and Pakistan were playing the semi-finals. I was in a Gurdwara doing some research, and this very esteemed kind of newspaper or news channel came to the Gurdwara, and their entire research, their entire news clip was based upon the fact that how Sikhs in Lahore were praying for Pakistan's victory. And that was supposed to be news. And I just didn't understand why would that even be questioned? But the idea is that because our identity is Muslim and we're Pakistanis. Everybody who's not Muslim in Pakistan
Doesn't feel Pakistani.
it's not Pakistani enough. And that's something that also then happened. I mean, so initially with Christians in Pakistan, it was more of a neutral kind of religion. So at the time of partition, I've interviewed a lot of old people who were Hindus and mostly low caste Hindus, because those are the kind of Hindus who remained back. I'm talking about central Punjab, and Sindh is a different story. So they at that time started wearing crosses, and they sort of adopted Christian names, and the idea was not to convert, but the idea was somehow to dilute their identity. I mean, once again, of course, people did not really know what partition was at that point. They thought it'll just be a temporary affair and they'll go back to normal situations. But eventually, of course, over time they became Christians. And now, so for the longest time, being a Christian in Pakistan was a very neutral religion. But then 9/11 happened. And suddenly you had a new conflict at a global scale between Christians and Muslims. I mean, I don't think of it as a Christian-Muslim conflict, but that's how it is viewed in the popular media from both ends. So suddenly you saw Christian churches being attacked. You saw Christian prominent figures being attacked in Pakistan. I remember when this Terry Jones video came a few years ago about, so when he burned the Quran, or something like that. I don't really remember what the video was. In Florida, I guess. A church in Mardan was burned as a reaction to that. And those poor Christians in Mardan probably had no idea who Terry Jones was. But now, eventually, then what started happening was that a lot of Christians, as soon as something like that would happen in America or in Europe, they would start putting up banners. So they'll be the first one to protest, the caricature of the Prophet of Islam, or about such activities, because they wanted to exert that they wanted to exert their Pakistani identity. They wanted to show how they are separate. Now, as far as the question about them being open to the idea of sharing their their experience in Pakistan concerned, there were a lot of concerns. They were not very comfortable. So that's where you have to you go back to them for a few times to sort of build a relationship with them. You tell them that you're on their side. But then once again, one criticism that I received was that I am a Sunni Muslim, which is the mainstream. I mean, being Sunni Muslim is essentially the sort of primordial Pakistani.
No one can question
identity.
your Pakistaniness.
Nobody questions my Pakistaniness. I mean, now they do, because I wrote about minorities, but that's a different issue. So one of their concerns was that why should you be concerned about our issues? Perhaps a person from a minority community should be interviewing us. Then you make an argument that no, intellectually perhaps we're all on the same panel, and intellectually perhaps we're also minorities in Pakistan. So, I mean, but then in interviews, I mean, it's not just the words that you hear. You also observe the body language. You observe how, what are they saying and why. I mean, how are they saying it? So, for example, if somebody throughout the interview keeps on repeating, "We love Pakistan, we love Pakistan," there's something odd about that. I mean, I'm not asking you if you love Pakistan. I'm asking you about your temple. Why are you repeating that? I mean, that sort of also goes on to show. So these are the kind of things you sort of pick at. And that's where I think writing is much easier than, let's say, making a documentary, because it gives you more flexibility.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting thing. And the last example that you picked up, because I remember being in New York in the days after 9/11, and you had Muslims and Sikhs in particular carrying posters and banners saying, "We are proud Americans, we are proud Americans," in a sense saying that don't question our patriotism, don't question our nationality, which is what you're saying. The minorities in Pakistan feel that they have to do all the time. Azurdah sahab, coming back to the point you were making earlier, in a sense, this idea that we're all born as human beings, and we are trained to think about ourselves in a particular way. This is what Benedict Anderson called imagined communities. We imagine ourselves to belong to a particular race, a particular religion, a particular linguistic tradition, as the case may be. And the idea that, anybody who studies conflict sort of comes across in their research time and time again is that, the Western concept or the first world concept of nationalism is one that's based on how the state, the sort of the state and the separation of religion and state is what dominates. Your passport is who you are, not anything else. Nonetheless, we see that there is certainly an amount of xenophobia that ensures that this divide will always come up to the surface. Those fault lines will not be erased. speaking in terms of what's happening in Kashmir as well, and the conflict that we have seen in Kashmir, as a Kashmiri, you say that, I was born a human being. Nonetheless, your own people are fighting and dying every day for an independent country, an independent nation. What is that Kashmiri nation?
Mayaji, perhaps you have dragged it too long and too far away from the main point. My problem is altogether different. My problem is there are only two sects. सिर्फ दो तबके होते हैं, एक पावरफुल होता है, एक नॉन पावर वाला तबका होता है. एक का हाथ ऊपर रहता है, दूसरे का नीचे रहता है. ये सब इसी के गिमिक्स हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल आई टेल यू, अब आप दुनिया भर में घूमिए, समवेयर यू हैव एम्बेसीज, समवेयर हाई कमीशंस, बिकॉज वी आर स्टिल हैविंग दैट लेगेसी. नॉट ओनली दैट, आजकल मैं आपसे कहता हूँ कि यू गो टू राजस्थान, राजस्थान में जितने पैलेसेस थे, दे वर कन्वर्टेड इनटू होटल्स everywhere, and we go and very proudly stay there. वो फ्यूडल वो जो है अंदर, वो अभी तक हमारे अंदर है, हम अंदर से बाहर निकल ही नहीं पाए हैं. तो हम चाहते हैं कि हम we should look like kings and all that, वो पावर. और दूसरी बात ये कि जिसकी तरफ इन्होंने इशारा किया, even history is as tricky as other thing. Voltaire wrote two sentences at two different places. That one, that history is nothing but a pack of tricks that could be played at dead. The other one, history proves everything can be proved by history. We have seen Wajid Ali Shah. See, we have seen Wajid Ali Shah. He wrote 110 books, but Britishers wanted him to be portrayed as a different person. What could not be possible? Who writes? These ladies have written 4, 5, 6, a dozen books, and then they don't have time for anything else. Now you can think, man who wrote 110 books, governed a sovereign country in his own time, Awadh, whose wife Begum Hazrat Mahal fought for India. She is buried in Nepal. I don't know after earthquake whether her that grave is somewhere or not. We made a film on Begum Hazrat Mahal. See, people have, for their own purpose, given different names, distributed people in different sects, in different groups. And what I tell you, I read Akka Mahadevi. We had Lala Arifa there. While translating vachanas from through filter language, English and Hindi and Urdu, from Kannada to Kashmiri, I could find there was similar thinking from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Kashmir to Karnataka. They thought in the same manner, perhaps they were thinking for humanity. Now I tell you one thing, what happens? Every day you get a news. We do apologies to people who belong to media. Once I said, we are ruled by a particular community. I should not name it here because I am afraid of contempt. And then the politicians, and then the hooligans. That community is subservient to politicians. Politicians are subservient to hooligans. They can sacrifice thousands of us, but not a hooligan because they need him. Now this fourth community, media has crept in during the last decade. And all the three are scared of it. All the three are scared of it. It's not that what you are. It is how you are presented. How you are projected. Many people who were maroons, but because of media, because of patronage, they were projected in such a way that they became everything. There were people, I have written a couplet in it's Kashmiri, that Akal Dana Yete Skuch, Pendit Asan Tulhak Tav. There were many wise men, but their mouths were shut like this, and people made fun of them, their wisdom nobody just listened to. I should say we are the followers of this world history, the world legacy. We are the people who killed Socrates, who made Plato to go from village to village. We killed Hussain along with his progeny in Karbala. And for what? Even now we don't understand what it is. By the same people. And then another thing I tell you, every time you need a man to fight with, and you need a back also, a man who would patronize you. In Pakistan, when there were Muslims only, they tried to find out Ahmadis, they tried to find out Baha'is, and others with whom they would fight. In India, there were already these communities, so there's no dearth of this fighting and all that. But I tell you one thing, that what happens? We, Indians or Pakistanis or Bangladeshis, we have pawned ourselves to certain forces. Ethnic identity, it has something to do with culture. And we all literatures, including these media people, we are fighting for culture. What culture? We had 300 turbans in Rajasthan. Every turban would denote a different tribe. Now those turbans are where? In museum. If you go to Hirapana market in Bombay, any of the malls in Bangalore, to Connaught Place, with dress you cannot find who comes from south and who comes from north and who comes from west or east. Last time I was inaugurating a seminar, it was on cultural literature. It was in Punjab. I told them that day is not very far away when you will have to call experts from America who would tell you what missi ki roti is and what sarson ka saag is. See, in our childhood, here are elders also, it was thought very bad to open mouth like this, as our kids open it for burger every time. You see, what's culture? Our food habits are gone, our dress is gone, our architecture is gone, and then language too. You watch these emails, you watch these messages. How do we do it? Perhaps we are losing a lot. We are giving away a lot and gaining nothing. Someone is ruling us. And then I tell you, I warn these media people also, whenever a wise man is born in our community, people try to hire him or her. And do you know what they do if he is not or she is not hired or she doesn't surrender? They fire him or her.
Yeah.
That we are seeing every day. Brain drain, it is because of that. Somewhere they offer money. Somewhere they offer wine. Somewhere they offer freedom.
So in
These
fact,
are slogans. These are slogans only because commoner wants to live. He
Right.
doesn't have any other problem.
in fact, that brings me to my next.
I'll just complete
yeah, very
it.
quickly,
None
sir.
of our scientists want to become the prime minister. None of our farmers want to become education minister or agriculture minister. Both are committing suicide. There are reasons, and there's a background for all these things.
Right.
So what she was trying to say, that in Kashmir, people are daily killed, they cry for independence or something, whatever is there. It's only two powers. One is the powerful, the other is at the receiving end. In the morning session, Subodh read a poem on AFSPA, on mothers of Northeast. Since you have not seen it, so you can't judge it in the right perspective. Now she has seen it in Sri Lanka, that is how she is able to talk about it. Can you imagine in Jharkhand today, mothers get the leaves of trees, dry them up, then grind them, then make bread and feed their kids.
Right.
So we have to fight that.
Right.
When we talk of this, the ethnic identity, we should not forget that what for are we striving and और हमें चाहिए क्या,
Right.
ये भी नहीं मालूम. आजकल जो आपकी डिमांड है ये आपकी डिमांड नहीं है, कोई और आपसे ये डिमांड करवाता है. अगर आपका बच्चा कोई खास चीज मांगता है तो ये आपके कल्चर में नहीं है. Someone else is forcing him.
Yeah, I just want to bring the others
Please.
in on this as well because you made that point ki when you decide to get into conflict, whatever the nature of it, you need to have someone who follows you and someone who's got your back and someone you're fighting against. Padma, taking off from this, and again with the example of Sri Lanka, this idea that if people have sustainable lives, jobs, employment, opportunities, they won't have time to follow the wrong path, whatever that path may be, if it is in terms of conflict. Now, this is an argument that's been used in every conflict zone time and time again. The youth are the ones who are joining the fight because they don't have opportunity. There is no opportunity because there is conflict that creates a system where no one wants to go in. In Sri Lanka as well, a similar situation?
Are you talking about post-war Sri Lanka, or you're talking about during
Through
the
the
war? Was
conflict,
that
yeah,
one
through-
of the
through the
instigating
civil war,
factors?
yeah.
Well, it was a vicious circle during the war, Maya, because as you know, the root cause of the war lay in the fact that there was Sinhalese dominance in, as I said, civil service jobs and various other places. And of course, there was, certainly there were sections of Sinhalese society, as there are sections in all societies, that did have a kind of, a superior attitude towards the Tamils. But during the 30 years of war, there was just absolutely no possible way that the Sri Lankan state could have created and sustained and supported a fully functioning infrastructure within the north and east, which were absolutely ripped apart and devastated by the war for those 30 years. There were several battles. It wasn't just one battle, as you know. And the other thing was that, having said that, the Sri Lankan state did somehow doggedly and determinedly keep institutions alive in the north and east, if only to still lay its claim on those areas and to sustain the sovereignty of those areas. For instance, children who lived in the north and east could and would take their O-level exams at government schools. But then the people, I mean, where were government hospitals still existed, but then where could these people, most of the people who were there were either then polished off or killed by the LTTE or eventually died in bombing. So it was a very, very difficult task. I mean, this is a utopian world, as you say, you know, in a conflict zone, the conflict would die out automatically if you pumped in a lot of money into a conflict zone and kept it alive. Something similar is happening in Kashmir. It has been happening for several decades. A lot of money is going in. But is that, now, you know, I won't divert to Kashmir because you're the expert there. But in Sri Lanka, no. What I'd like to say is that one of the things, Maya, which has been extremely dangerous and has contributed considerably to attitudes and to public perception of the war has been, as you were saying, sir, the media. We were at fault. And this is where, if you may, I'd just like to point out two things. The overseas correspondence file copy, and almost always, copy is always, copy meaning your text, the article you write, it's always, it's sometimes rewritten and sometimes sub-edited, of course, but sometimes it changes its content and shape entirely. There are very, very few editorial desks in the world that are entirely uncolored and unmanipulated. Now, why is this so? Is it because the political opinions and personal beliefs of the editors are at variance with those of their reporters? Because after all, as you said, you know, reporters are the ones who actually see and know and what's going on the ground. And this may be sometimes at variance with their editors. And sometimes if you ask editors this, why did you change somebody's text? Fortunately, it never happened to me, so I wouldn't have lasted with a foreign publication for that long. But many times editors say, readers want to know the truth. But the question is, and I ask all of you as readers, what is that? Is it this definition of truth that raises the question, whose truth or what truth do you want to read? Do you want to read truth through a particular prism, like a favorite brand of sunglasses, of the media's choosing and liking? Or do you want to read a truth that is dictated by your own country's foreign policy and your own country's geostrategic consideration? Or do you want to read the truth that is the telling like it is reality, as seen and experienced by the reporter on the ground, never mind how unexpected and how unlike, through your own bioscope? If I may just quickly, I just wanted to give you a few examples, concrete examples. Narrative on Sri Lanka. I mean, the war ended in 2009. We're now in 2015. If you read the international media, you will find that not much has changed essentially in the narrative. It continues to be ruled by two expressions: human rights abuses and genocide, as committed by the government and army of Sri Lanka. There is hardly a mention of or an attempt to bring to the book the remnants of the LTTE, especially its financiers, most of whom are still scattered around the world. world. And at the same time, you have armed conflict that Western nations are embroiled in, be it in Afghanistan, be it in Pakistan, or be it in Iraq. That is measured through a totally different yardstick. Now, the United States war in Afghanistan and its drone attacks in Pakistan are, in inverted commas, a war against terror. The West's ongoing action in Syria and Iraq against ISIL militants are by a coalition of the willing. This coalition of the willing, it evokes very angelic choir boys. It doesn't evoke mighty, deadly armies that are operating there. Both these actions are supposed to be uprooting terrorists on alien soil. But the Sri Lankan government's army's offensive, the Sri Lankan army's offensive against the separatist LTTE on its own soil is usually described as one against underground rebels, or, depending on the publication, even as freedom fighters. Now, you take this example, the Daily Mail UK refers to the US soldier who killed terrorist leader Osama bin Laden as an esteemed Navy SEAL. That's the man who killed Osama, is referred to as an esteemed Navy SEAL. This is the Daily Mail UK, 15 September 2014. The same paper, reporting the killing of LTTE chief Prabhakaran during the final stages of the Sri Lankan civil war, refers to him as the Tamil Tiger leader. This is 20th May 2009. Now, there is this organization, Non-Proliferation for Global Security, and many other bodies. According to these bodies, the Al-Qaeda has so far been responsible for 31 attacks that took more than 4,400 lives. The most conservative estimates place the number of lives lost during the Sri Lankan civil war between 100,000 and 120,000. Now, even if you assume, which is an absurd assumption, but let's make that absurd assumption, even if you assume that 75% of the deaths in the civil war were caused by the Sri Lankan army alone, don't forget thousands were killed in LTT suicide attacks, that figure still leaves about 30,000 deaths which are unaccounted for. Yeah. Nobody knows where these people went. And then suicide bombings, the LTT alone executed 315 suicide bombings. That is more, ladies and gentlemen, that is more than the Hezbollah and the Hamas put together.
Have done, right? I survived one of those suicide bombings myself. So, Haroon, very quickly before I open it, we just have about 7 minutes left. So, but I want you to come in on the points that both our panelists have made on this issue of opportunity, employment, jobs, the youth, and the attraction of taking on a conflict if that is an opportunity that presents itself.
I think that's once again an example of lazy journalism, as we talked about earlier. I don't think unemployment or lack of education is an issue. In fact, my opinion is quite the contrary on this regard. I think education perhaps might be a problem.
Right.
I know, so for example, if you look at the cases of violence against minorities in Pakistan, most of them have happened in Punjab. Punjab is the most educated, is the most developed province in the country.
It's the wealthiest.
It's also the wealthiest. And even within Punjab, those incidents have happened in cities, bigger cities, Lahore. It's happened in Kasur. It's happened in recently in Jhelum, in Rawalpindi. These are biggest, most prosperous cities of the country. So why? And you have a very high education rate in those cities. So why is it happening here? Why is it not happening in the tribal areas, for example? Through my research, I found out there's a huge population of Hindus and Sikhs living in the tribal areas, the least developed areas of the country, the least educated areas of the country, and they've been living there peacefully since the rise of the Taliban. So only after Taliban have they been sent to the cities of Punjab. Before that, they've been living there, and they're sort of ingrained. They are part of the society, the tribal society. They're part of the tribal jirga. Nobody's ever raised any question about their nationalism. But on the other hand, in Punjab, the Hindus have had to hide their identities. The Sikhs have to hide their identities. You don't see that happening in Sindh, and especially in places which are away from the centers. In Tharparkar, there's a huge population of Hindus. It's the least prosperous area of the country. You have drought there every year. I mean, hundreds of kids die there, or every other year because of lack of water. But you'd hardly see any instances of violence against minorities. I mean, it's happening now, but that's a different issue altogether. So for me, it's not. Even if you look at how Al-Qaeda, for example, was operating, I mean, there's a lot of people that they found were sort of very educated, Al-Qaeda perhaps, it's a bad example to talk about them there, but if you look at Punjabi sort of militant organizations in Pakistan, their cadres are very, I won't say very educated once again, but are those who've gone to schools, who've gone to certain madrasas, who have certain level of education. I think you need a certain kind of propaganda through education for them to be sort of...
to be able to go and take that.
To be able to sort of feed on that. So for me, it's not the issue of employment.
It's not the issue. Okay, all right. We have just about 5 minutes left. So questions, comments from the audience? Any hands? Sorry? Yes. Can you just get this gentleman a microphone, please?
When you said we are born as human beings, but are we behaving in this world as human beings? That is a question for all of us to think. Second, divide and rule, that's what you said. That is the problem all over the world, all these centuries. How do we deal with it in the future? That is our task as writers, poets, everything extra. Thank you.
Okay. We'll just take a comment from there as well and then bring back. Yeah.
Thank you for the very thought-provoking presentation. My question is for Padma.
Louder, we can't hear you.
My question is for Padma. You talked about the divide and rule tactic or strategy in Sri Lanka, and it was primarily the representation of a particular community in civil service.
Yeah.
Now, this has been the grudge not only in Sri Lanka but all across India, including Bengal, where that was started as the point where the community started worrying. Now, my question is, today in this age of globalization and unprecedented opportunities all across Southeast Asia, do you think we can move beyond this kind of Ma-Baap Sarkar representation conflict? Thank you.
Padma, why don't you take that question? And
I think both, I'll just finish off the
Yeah.
divide and
Yeah.
rule question for both.
Yeah.
Sir, to the senior gentleman about divide and rule. Sir, this is, I really don't know. I mean, how do we overcome it? As you pointed out, Kaustubh, I think, the new form of divide and rule, the new avatar of divide and rule is this kind of economic neo-imperialism, if you'd like. That is certainly happening. And I guess the only thing that countries that have experienced this policy firsthand, specifically colonized countries, must be aware, and perhaps policies governing investments and MNCs and could be a little more cautious and could be a little more watchful. Perhaps we need to evolve watchdog bodies to ensure that both the country that is the investor as well as the country where the investment is being made both stand to that it's a fair bargain and that the one side is not ripped off altogether. I would imagine those would be solutions, and I can imagine those are happening in some countries already. I mean, one country I can think of very offhand and completely unrelated to what we discuss is a tiny country like the Maldives, which depends entirely on foreign investment, not producing anything of its own. It does have regulation and draconian laws in place, which may not, which the people who invest don't always agree with, but they jolly well toe the line, if there is something in that country that they want bad enough or badly enough.
Yeah.
So that would be my answer to the divide and rule. And Kaustubh, I'm not sure what else you asked.
on the jobs, on the,
Globalization, how...
On the globalization.
Globalization
I
and
think
jobs.
this pretty much
Answers both, yeah. Azurdah, if you wanted to come in on this.
I said this was very relevant when you had this kind of a colonial government where they played with the representation.
Yes. What
Today
now?
we don't have a colonial government.
I think
we have more
MNCs
job
I think-
opportunities.
I think
I'll take
MNCs
it.
have replaced the
I'll
colonial
take it.
government.
I'll take it.
Neo-colonialism.
तो
Imperialism.
एक्चुअली ये जो डिवाइड एंड रूल है या इस तरह की जो चीज़ है, एक बात पहले देखना चाहिए. जैसे अफगानिस्तान में ये तालिबान वगैरह किसने इसको प्रमोट किया, वही जो आज चिल्ला रहा है इसके खिलाफ. इसी तरह से मोस्ट ऑफ द कंट्रीज where they started all this, they are crying today. And we are unmindful till it comes to us.
Right.
I tell you that you were saying divide and rule. We even today, आज भी हमारी वो कलोनियल जो जहनियत जो है वो गई नहीं. गायत्री देवी goes to Paris, delivers lectures there, gets a certificate from America. आज भी हम देखते हैं ब्रिटिशर्स ने हमारे लिए क्या लिखा, अमेरिकन्स ने क्या लिखा, and nobody knows. ये जो कुछ हो रहा है इसके पीछे कितने लंबे हाथ हैं, किसके हैं. We need to ponder over it. We need to make ourselves understand. And then another thing I tell you, whatever problems we don't see them ourselves.
Right.
Someone else comes and shows, you have
Shows
this
us
problem, you have this problem in your home. So it's actually that we are not able to see beyond a particular curtain.
One of the, very quickly, just one thing which I think is very, very essential, which has not happened adequately in this country, in India, is the formation, or the formulation rather, of proper and fair labor laws that protect people who take on jobs with multinationals in this country. Right now, everything weighs in the favor of the investor, not those who are being investigated.
Yes.
That's the globalized world's
That's the-
conflict and
yes.
neo-imperialism. I think we'll have to conclude on that, but I know there's lots of comments. The writers and the authors and panelists are all milling around, so please catch them to ask them questions, and we will try and continue this maybe over a cup of tea elsewhere. But
Thank them
thanks
on
so
our
much.
behalf. No? Thank them
you.
on
Yeah,
our behalf.
I am. Thank you all so much.
Well, talk of imperialism, and here I am, time dictator. This is dictatorship. Well, I can't help it, can I, in this role? Because the session, of course, was delightful, and how sometimes ethnic identities are forced from outside. I think that, coming from absolute first-hand lived experiences, is what this panel has given us. Let's give them a round of applause, Bangalore City. In fact, this applause will have to carry on for a little more, because joining us in a bit, and I'm going to be looking for any organizer who can give me the go-ahead. 5 minutes more. All right, so 5 minutes more, and you shall have an element of Bollywood on to Bangalore Literature Festival. So I will see you in about 4 minutes, 59 seconds from now. Thank you.